and it shows all the different parts of the aircraft that could come out if it went to electric. It had the large batteries on the sides there, but all the engine, the exhaust, the transmissions, a lot of the other claptrap fuel systems could come out of the aircraft and make it simpler. Also with, if you can have get rid of the rotor and go to multiple really dumb propellers, get rid of cyclic liquid fuel has about 50 times the energy density of batteries, so much more efficient. But if you can get on a wing, then you can get back a lot of that range and payload capability. But one of the most appealing things for eVTOL is the potential for very quiet operations. So the whole, the crux of making eVTOLs efficient is high capacity, high throughput, high operations. So if you can land in the city centers, land on rooftops or on skyports or vertiports, close to where the populace is, and move them around rapidly, rather than going through a hub and spoke or taking a cab to the airport or things like that. If you can either cross city by flying over it, or any other case where you're actually in the city and moving around the city, there's really a huge potential for urban air mobility that's not available today with helicopters due to the noise restrictions. Next. People often talk about urban air mobility and electric VTOL. They're not synonymous. So eVTOL enables all kinds of different aircraft, everything from small package delivery, personal flying devices, ultralight aircraft, personal vehicle, aircraft for cargo delivery or disaster relief. These are not urban air mobility missions. Even intercity, regional bizjet type of operations at the higher end with hybrids. Those also aren't urban; those are interurban. Next. So why now? There's really this confluence of technologies and just a really change in the environment. So there have been huge advances in electric motors, in batteries, the democratization of design tools with CFD and computer simulation of designing of fuselages in all aspects, flight controls, all kinds of advances that weren't available 5 or 10 years ago. Composites, low-cost manufacturing, but also changes in regulations, going to performance regulations. People just, there's so many technology innovations that we all have in our daily life, and people are just more disposed to being eager for a technology. So I think there's a difference in the mindset and more appeal from the society that they're looking for more technology innovations. Also, they say about $1 trillion has been made in the app economy. So you have people like Elon Musk, who made money with PayPal, started Tesla, now is launching a manned crew to the space station. So where we have something that was unthinkable 10 years ago, that you could actually have commercial space transportation, you have that now. So you see all these different types of innovations, this confluence that have come together to this point. Next, please. So we started the Electric VTOL News website 2 years ago. We're trying to categorize or catalog all of the different aircraft that we can find where people are looking at electric and hybrid electric aircraft. And because we can't see what people are really doing, we, behind what their graphics that they release, we include everything from the silly to the serious. So you have designs like this where you have to scratch your head and wonder, what were they thinking? To aircraft like Joby's that's really quite advanced and is doing a lot of great flight testing and really proving the capabilities of electric VTOL. So we have about 155 aircraft as of this morning cataloged. On the website, we also have nearly 200 articles that we've published over the last 6 years, as well as a lot of other information on eVTOL aircraft and the community. Next. So the Gartner hype cycle looks at things that are coming, technology adoption, and this is really a great example of the dot-com boom and bust. Next. So we're here. We're going up the hype cycle. Hype is good to a certain extent. It can get people excited, attract a lot of attention. But when you have designs like the one you saw before, where people are coming into this and drawing some sort of aircraft, but not really having any idea what they're doing, it's great, all this money and innovation is coming into the aerospace industry from outside. But you know, we need to look at this frankly. Next. So we're trying to educate people. We're providing these resources and just take a candid look at how things are. And I think you'll hear today with our panelists their view of not only the potential and the promise of electric VTOL, but also the challenges and how we're moving forward. Next. Uber in September of 2016 at our second annual workshop announced that they'll be working on electric VTOL. They came out with the white paper the following month. They're having annual summits. They're looking at the whole ecosystem. So it's not just the air vehicle. That's a challenging part, but it's the batteries, it's working with cities, real estate companies, charger manufacturers. You know, how do you get these, you know, basically like a electrical substation onto a skyport? So trying to connect the community of innovators, investors, regulators, technical experts, and the media, and get the public behind this. So some people unfortunately call them flying cars, but they're just small aircraft, but they have high barriers because they don't fit into the 100 years, 115 years plus of conventional aircraft development. So lots and lots of changes required. Next. So when you look at things, you know, 5, 6 years ago when I was telling people about urban air mobility and electric VTOL, I got a lot of giggles. Oh, that's just ridiculous, and it'll never happen. Even today, people in the helicopter industry say that's BS. That's just, people are just using that to sell magazines or prop up their stock prices. But it's not. If you peel back the onion, you really do the deep dive into each of the different areas of the different challenges, there is a path to everything, to achieving what needs to be done. Uber set down a terrific marker in 2016 that they wanted to have flight demos in 2020 and being operational in 2023. It's a great thing to excite the community and have put a stake in the ground as to what the objectives are, and they seem impossible. Any one of them seems impossible, and putting them all together, all 5 of them together, it seems extra impossible. But you see the quote down there at the bottom from Nelson Mandela. So it always seems impossible until it's done, and then it's no longer impossible. Then it was obvious that this was going to happen all along. So kudos to Uber, and we'll have a representative here from Uber that in the audience who can talk a bit more about that as well. Next. Because eVTOL aircraft are already flying today. So in the FAA ultralight category, which has to be less than 254 pounds, except for a lot of caveats, so you can actually get up to 432 or more pounds, they're flying today, and there's no approval necessary. So they can go out and fly, and people can fly them for recreation or have fun. So eVTOL is already here at the small scale. And over the next few years, it'll be scaling up to larger and larger aircraft. Next. At the small scale, the GoFly Prize is a $2 million competition sponsored by Boeing. And the plan is to have a flying competition for the smallest possible flying device, basically. They announced 10 winners last year. There's 40 competitors now for phase 2. They'll be announcing those, I think it's April 16th in a few weeks. So it's very exciting to see things at all ends of the spectrum. Next. So again, our website, evtol.news, we have a newsletter, we have Facebook and Twitter. We have lots of videos, especially for members, short courses that people can do on a pay-per-view basis. So we're really trying to educate the populace and provide these resources so people can understand the big context. Next. So again, going back to the beginning, so 75 years ago, there were a group of pioneers and innovators that had this crazy idea about this new vertical flight aircraft. At our first workshop in 2014, there's some real pioneers there, some real leaders that today are doing a lot of great things. So with that, want to have the next slide. And just think about how we are today. This isn't the beginning. This is a step along the way, and it's a very exciting future. And we want everybody to participate and help us move this forward as smoothly as possible. So, Elan, thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Mike. So our next panelist is going to be Scott Drennan from Bell. And just a note that Scott and I will be on a panel at the Bell booth this afternoon from 2 to 3, the Nexus Partner Panel, so doing a bit of a deeper dive into the Nexus. Hope you all can make it for that as well. So Scott is the Vice President of Bell's innovation team. He joined Bell in 1993 on the V-22 program, and he's spent most of his career as both a direct employee and contractor for Bell, focused on tilt rotors and other powered lift vehicle technologies. Today, his team's mission is to radically innovate technologies and aircraft configurations in order to create novel and coveted vertical lift experiences. So, Scott, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to start with a slide today. It's a cover sheet, essentially, but it's got some critical words on there, and those are lift as a service. It's the way that Bell is thinking about on-demand mobility, and it means that we'd like to move people, things, and data from point A to point B as the customer needs, and also consider the other portions of this great opportunity that go beyond just being an OEM and a service provider to those vehicles, but to start thinking about operational models, infrastructure, and the like that really need to be pulled together under one umbrella to have success in the future. Next. So Mike mentioned why now, and we think about that question a lot ourselves at Bell. What's kind of interesting, now it's sort of a study of history, because the why now is no longer a why not or a why now. It's why, let's get after it and get it done. And the reasons are, and he kind of said it in a little bit of a different way, that when you have market desires and technologies that converge, the speed at which these things come out historically is unprecedented. So you have to be really aware of that with the urban air mobility space because of those two factors. The classic picture that's always out there is Fifth Avenue in 1900 and then Fifth Avenue in 1903, where there's 1900, one car, all horse and buggies, 1903, all cars, one horse and buggy. And it was the same phenomenon. It was a market demand and technology coming together at the same time. And if they separate each other, it doesn't really work the same way. So this is just a slide to show some of the reasons that talk to those trends. And then we're starting to get some really interesting market assessments from, call them neutral party folks that are talking about the markets available. NASA sponsored some market assessments, and Morgan Stanley's come out with some. I know we're going to have a panelist that's talking about that. So really exciting and a really different time that we're all walking into. Next. So just a couple shots of Nexus. These are the glamour shots that Mike talks about a lot, but they get people energized, and they're necessary to continue the conversation. You can come by the booth and see the vehicle itself, the mock-up of it at full scale. Come and sit down inside of it and see where we're going. This shows us in both airplane mode and VTOL mode. It's always amazing. You think, as the person who speaks about these things a lot, you think, well, everyone understood that this was a a vehicle that was powered lift, but I even got some questions yesterday after we demonstrated the rotating ducts that said, well, we didn't why does it do that? And it's because we want to cruise like an airplane. That's been kind of fun to explain those things again. And the other thing that comes up a lot when they see that is they wonder how does the wing work inside that big group of ducts, and it's really that, well, it only works a little bit because it doesn't need to do too much else. The ducts in forward flight create lift and thrust, not just thrust. On the next slide, I think we've got a couple pictures of the interior, and I think what you'll see here from Bell is that we're challenging our engineers to make a comfortable and familiar interior, despite maybe what some would say is a short ride in urban air mobility. If you remember, with our vehicle, we're starting out with hybrid electric propulsion, so we plan to have a range target of about 150 miles initially at that same cruise speed, 150 miles an hour. And we'd like to be prepared for having people experience comfort as if they were in their automobile or perhaps in a higher end airline ticket scenario that they found themselves in. That's a challenge. It's called weight and it's called drag, but there are indications that your customers' desires to feel connected and comfortable and work together are more important than some of those things. And it reminds me of the reason I admire everybody that's in this great adventure in this industry, all the engineers that are working the problem. And that's what's happening here. When the hype curve stops and we get into those better plateaus that Mike described, all along that curve, I'd encourage everyone to never forget about the engineers that are truly working the problem, because they run that emotional cycle, and it's just amazing to see them accomplish things along the way and recover through those other pieces. And Nelson Mandela is right, and it's only impossible till it's done, and the way it gets done is focusing on the problem. It's just a great day every day that I have watching our young engineers figure out each of these hurdles. So next slide. So a couple of the high points, if you haven't heard us talk about it before, the Nexus has a single engine hybrid distributed electric propulsion system on board, a serial hybrid. It has emergency battery power as a means to deal with a contingency of an OEI event. So we're going to bring our customers down to the ground in the event of an emergency under full power and full control. And that battery system also serves to help us with transients of power as we need them during different maneuvers and gust situations. That's something, again, that there's a cost to that. But the alternative of a parachute or some other means to get to the ground that's not comfortable and safe for our customers is unacceptable to Bell. So we again embark on working that problem in order to achieve that goal in accordance to our vision about how the vehicle should be. It's got 6 ducted tilting fans, redundant electric motors in those fans. It's man unmanned. Our initial vehicle will be completely autonomous, but certification-wise and customer acceptance-wise, as we all enter into the market, we do believe that we'll need a manned version, and that's to say piloted, so that those initial flights can help the new customer base, that broader customer base that we're all trying to address, feel a lot more comfortable. And we've got some target gross weights, ranges, and speeds for you there too. Next slide. So we've talked about this. Team Nexus is a team we're really proud of, and you can see it's founded in people who know what aviation is, know how to certify vehicles, and know how to produce those vehicles or components in great numbers with a quality system that means you get what you designed on the backside of the factory line. And then when you integrate those together, you have a safe and high-quality vehicle. Only kind of newcomer in there for us is EPS, but they're doing a fantastic job with energy storage and the batteries that we're putting on the system. Next slide. A couple of shots of my favorite people in the world, our engineering team, both on the design side, the performance side for the vehicle, and on the manufacturing side. And you know, these slides are our progression in the ducts. You know, out of the chute to static duct test down at our local facility, based on historical data about ducts, got that pretty good, refined it, went up into the wind tunnel in Ottawa with the Canadian government in a partnership with them to run it full scale and powered, and then we're at our 8th scale airframe aircraft model, also powered in an undisclosed wind tunnel, but I'm sure there's somebody in here that can see what that is. I don't know, and that's okay. Also the picture on the right is the challenges of building a duct like that. So you got to focus on what you think. You know, you kind of fake it in the beginning if you like, but it's not about just for us getting into the air. It's about us targeting an objective vehicle. And so we decided to kick off a lot of the manufacturing and process verification, the build part of the vehicle, so that we're not only ready for our tech demonstration, but the objective aircraft that's going to serve the public. So next slide. So the other part of lift of a service for us is moving things, and Nexus can do the people mission or the thing mission, and it can collect data as well, but it's a complex aircraft in order to meet the particular mission of having people on board, say in the air taxi case. And so we've started to design a family of aircraft called APT, so it stands for Autonomous Pod Transport, and it's in response to that same convergence of market demand of I want my goods when I want them, which turns out to be now in this part of the world, and the folks that provide those services logistically just need more SKUs available same day, 2 hours, and we're designing a system to support those kind of activities, and here's some of the market reasons behind it. Next slide. You'll see that we're not really thinking about last mile, although we're open to discussing it with folks. We're talking about beyond the last mile, really shoring up complex logistics systems, moving goods from distribution center to distribution center to hubs or kiosks, rather than get the soccer sneakers in everybody's backyard. This is, I think, a bigger system that requires a sophisticated aircraft that can have a range of payloads and serve the mission of a logistics company, either commercial or military or otherwise, that allows them to do what they prefer as the last mile solution, which could be a drone, but it also could be, as we're discovering, they'd like their people to hand their customers their packages, and so we would enable that capability with our vehicles. Next slide, I think, shows that this is a very scalable, adaptable, and versatile vehicle, many different missions for commercial and military, and we're trying to make a very simple design. That's what it is. It's modular in the sense that the pod could be a sensor ball, could be other things that people want to strap in between the two pylons, and that's been proving itself out pretty well lately. Next slide. Some achievements in APT, again, my favorite people, and they deserve a lot of credit for what they're doing. My goal is to get them out and about more often in 2019 to meet folks like yourselves and others. We were at CES with APT. We flew her all fully autonomous conversion, takeoff, landing, waypoint flight. That was great. In particular, the conversion. That's the trickier part in there. Lots of people are working on that too. Zach's doing a great job of that as well. Got our experimental airworthiness ticket, which is great. You're getting more independent opportunities now to operate the vehicle, and that was a great partnership with the FAA. So now we can go out and fly it like we do our normal test aircraft for traditional vehicles, albeit in more remote locations, and we'll try to walk that in. And walking that in, speaking of that, on the next slide, one of our best achievements was winning the NASA SIO contract, and that's about getting the system, which will be AP 70 in this case. 70 represents the payload, and she's about a 300-pound, 325-pound aircraft, into more relevant environments for true operations. And we're partnered with NASA and the FAA to do that around 3 missions. One was urban emergency medical supply, and the other was disaster relief, and the third was kind of shallow water oil rigs. And really the team's now focusing on that urban critical medical transport, and that's the plan in 2020. We're going to fly through some very complex airspace in the DFW area and deliver some medical equipment or goods to its final destination. Great challenge, and looking forward to accomplishing that in the next year. Next slide. I think I have a video here just to show you how APT flies. It's another one that we get a lot of questions on. It's a tail-sitting biplane, so takes off vertically like a multicopter would. In this case, four pylons and rotors from that configuration. Standard challenges of a tail sitter, bad CG in the 2 configurations, and then a lot of surfaces for the wind to grab hold of as you're taking off, but you can control that pretty quickly as you go into vertical. I think you saw she pivoted a little bit. That's always her getting into the wind as she's taking off vertically. This is the conversion to wing-borne flight. And really the best, everyone asks about range and duration. Think twice as far, twice as fast. That's what powered lift does for you. And we can work with customers to change the batteries, the propellers, the motors, the payload to get the ranges that are needed, all to the within the boundaries of the physics. But it's looking like versus any kind of multicopter, those are the kind of numbers we should be thinking about. There's reconversion and back to the landing. I had a fun video in there. I'm already probably going over my time, but you can go to the next. It'll just re-loop. And next again. Yeah. So I had a fun video in there too of one of my engineers breaking the vehicle down in front of the Commandant of the Marine Corps and putting it back together. And we had a stopwatch on him. He was in his tie and his wool suit and sweating. We weren't sure whether it was because of the wool suit or the Commandant watching him, but the aircraft comes apart at those 4 pylons with just quick release fasteners. There's a low voltage connection across those to get to the control system. All the high voltage stuff is out in the pylon. So it's kind of a zero charge readiness model that if you have enough of a logistic chain where you can carry some extra pylons with you, say another set, the vehicle can come in, hot swap those pylons out, and you don't have to wait for the charge cycle, and you can take it down to lower states of charge. Well, thank you, and I look forward to the questions.
Great, thank you very much, Scott. Our next panelist is Zach Lovering from Airbus. He's the Vice President of Urban Air Mobility Systems at Airbus, and in this position he oversees Airbus's UAM operations in the U.S. and is responsible for overall UAM system architecture. Previously he served as project executive for Vahana, where he led the development of the self-piloted eVTOL demonstrator aircraft created at A-Cubed, which is the advanced projects outpost of Airbus in Silicon Valley. Welcome, Zach.
All right, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I thought I would share a bit of my journey, like why I got into this space, and through that share the challenges that I see coming up ahead and also how we're trying to tackle this. So I think the foundational message that we had going into this from 3 years ago when I started doing the Vahana project was that it's an undeniable fact that future mobility is vertical. Next slide, please. And to me, this is one of the most telling reasons about why that's the case. This is Google Maps. I'm sure you recognize these if you live in these cities or similar ones. This is 6 p.m. traffic in each one of these cities, and this is average traffic, right? This is not like a bad day where there's an accident. This is just average traffic. Pretty much those systems are extremely frustrating. They're grounded. They're painfully slow. And historically, we've had similar kind of issues in our workspaces and our living spaces, and we've solved them by growing up the buildings, making them taller, going to hundreds, 20, 30, 40 story tall buildings. Yet we haven't done the same thing for our transportation systems. So another interesting piece of information is there are roughly 1.5 million people living in Manhattan, but there's 3 million people that work there. And that is enabled by the fact that they have skyscrapers and allow people to move in, but still you're seeing congestion like this. So the real question is, how can we, what systems can we put in place today to take that 2-hour commute that you might have and change that to 10 minutes? Next slide. So this is actually the story that actually, these are real data points in Sao Paulo today where we have our VOOM operations. The time it takes to drive from the airport to downtown Sao Paulo is about 2 hours. And you can get in one of our helicopters today through an app. You just say where you are, where you're going, and you'll be at your destination in 10 minutes. But even with this solution today, which is based around helicopters, it's still out of reach for a lot of people. Next slide. So what are the technologies that have come along that have really changed this? And Mike touched upon some of these, but I think they're really important to reiterate here. So distributed electric propulsion increases safety tremendously, allows it so that you don't have a single point of failure anymore, as you do with a lot of vertical lift systems, and also allows you to reduce noise. Digital design and manufacturing allows for automated, low-cost production, which really brings down the unit cost of these vehicles. Advanced avionics, autonomy, air traffic management, those things allow for these systems to scale. From what we're seeing, going from traditionally hundreds of helicopters being sold per year to thousands or even tens of thousands of these new eVTOLs, really these are the kinds of things that we're going to need to scale up these systems. Infrastructure allows for city integration, connectivity allows for accessibility, and new business models allow for a on-demand and shared economy. So these are the things that make UAM a reality today. Next slide. And so you can go ahead and start playing it. So that's kind of what led me to start this project. This is what the inspiration was behind of it. This is our single passenger demonstrator flying today. So this was, I think, just a few weeks ago. This is a 50-knot flight, so we're not quite through the transition phase. But so the transition ends around 80 knots. And you'll see here that convert to forward flights, the wings tilt forward, and then we do a little, some chirps in the middle for system identification for our controls team. And the wings end up being just about 30 degrees above flat. So it's getting pretty close to making it all the way through transition. Yeah, so here you see it accelerate, pitches down first, and then the wings start tilting. So we started this project about 3 years ago. It was just a very tiny team at the time, just me and one other person. I was originally the chief engineer for the project. We grew a team up to 40 people, and now are doing these flight tests today. Thanks. Next slide. So all that said, I think for Airbus, in some ways, the vehicles are the easy part. We have not only Vahana flying today, but City Airbus well on its way to doing the same. And so both the enablers and the challenges we see ahead are kind of listed here. These are the things that we're now focused on. We're not just looking at the vehicle. To build an urban air mobility system, you need a lot more than just aircraft. So we need support and services. We have to deal with supply chain issues. You need flight operations. So we're getting some experience with that with VOOM today. You need air traffic management solutions, again, to scale. We're not talking about having 10 or maybe 20 airplanes flying in an airspace. We're talking about having hundreds of thousands. It's a very different world. And all that intermixed with drone services and commercial operations. Ground infrastructure, so there is no, for electric aircraft, there's no charging infrastructure on these helipads today. So that needs to get built up. Also, in many cities, there's just not helipad infrastructure that's needed for this, and so we're going to have that come up as well. And finally, passenger solutions. And so you can see here a screenshot from that VU map I mentioned earlier, which is actually active today in Sao Paulo, Mexico City, and now they're launching 2 more cities over the next year. Next slide. So, as I said before, the future of mobility is vertical, and I think it's an absolutely undeniable fact. And Airbus is working on the entire supply chain to make that happen today. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Zach. Our next speaker is Thierry Grison from Safran. He's VP of Business Development for Hybrid New Market for Safran, and he has more than 20 years of experience in the helicopter engine business across areas including sales, support, supply chain programs, marketing, and strategy. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. It's a privilege for Safran to share with you our vision regarding new hybrid propulsion system. I'm the only French guy on the panel, so I'm not an English native speaker. It's a chance for me. You have to listen to me closely. Next, please. So this is a roadmap of Safran companies. So today we are working on solutions in order to develop solutions for application from 100 kilowatt to 10 megawatts. In Safran Group, we have also the expertise to design a full electric propulsion system with turbo generator, batteries, electrical engines, e-propeller, and also power management. We have also the skills to integrate such a system into an aircraft and experience in certifying helicopter engines. Next, please. For Safran helicopter engines, you know Safran helicopter engines is a part of Safran Group. So we have decided to work on these 3 power ranges. So for us, full electric will happen progressively. We don't think that for the type of application we are targeting, we will have a full electric solution before 2040. So this limitation is due to current battery density technologies. In the meantime, though, the progress on batteries, on density for batteries, will allow eVTOL to switch progressively to a more favorable hybridization ratio rate from thermal to electric. Next, please. I brought a short video in order to explain to you how a full electric hybrid propulsion system works. There is no sound. So you get a turbo generator. So this recharge batteries. So the turbo generator should either work in direct with electrical engines or should recharge battery. In the middle, you get the supervisor. So this is the power management. He takes the decision he decide from either to supply power to electrical engines or to recharge batteries. So all the system works together. This is a complex system. And we, in Safran, we can develop all this system, everything. So after that, you get the supervisor, which is decided which hybridization level is required, and either it comes from battery or from turbo generator. If something happens, the supervisor will be able to decide to push the battery or to work with the turbo generator in order to supply power to electrical engines. Next, please. So, in Safran, over the last 3 years, we have conducted several market surveys. And we have decided to concentrate our R&D efforts on the 3 segments. So, the logistic and the on-demand mobility with VTOL, but also commuter. So for logistic, so this will enter into service in 2025. So this will allow our customer to transport loads from 150 kilograms to 500 kilograms or more. This application will be unmanned, and this will require 100 kilowatt to 600 kilowatt. So VTOL, so the main mission is to transport passenger, 4 or 5 passengers, over the cities. So this means that we need a social acceptance, including noise reduction, emission reduction, high level of safety, and also DOC never reached so far before by vertical aircraft. So we have developed for that a range of power from 300 kilowatt to 600 kilowatt, depending on the payload of the aircraft. And commuter, so the main mission is to transport passengers from point to point using mainly secondary airport. So for that, depending on the number of packs, we develop 600 kilowatt to 3 megawatts. Next, please. So very often, we get the question, how all of this will impact the helicopter business? For us, the impact will be very limited because this is new market. And if we take the example of the VTOL market, for example, there is no so much helicopter which are allowed to fly over the cities. So the VTOL will have to compete tomorrow against traditional means of transport, like train, bus, subways. So this means that the helicopter market has a very long life with itself, and there is no better means there is no better means than the helicopter for all hovering missions capabilities. Next, please. So 80, this is a number of years we have in experiencing, designing, producing, supporting, and certifying helicopter engines. So for the new air vertical mobility, what we intend to do, this is not to be a spectator. We want to be part of the new vertical history as a leading key partner. So thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Thierry. Our next panelist is going to be Danny Sitnam. He's the President and Chief Executive Officer of Helijet International. Now celebrating 33 years in service, Helijet has boarded over 2.5 million passengers to become the largest scheduled helicopter airline in the world. And Danny was inducted into the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame in 2017. Danny, welcome.
Ken. Just a short clip here on what we do up north. So this is our operation up in Haida Gwaii, which is up on the west coast of British Columbia. A set of islands, archipelago islands, beautiful country. I call it Jurassic in many ways. Here we service all the fishing lodges, the big resorts of the world that bring in thousands of tourists every year. And if you enjoy fishing or if you just enjoy nature, this is a beautiful part of the world to visit. Hope you can get there one day. Anyways, good morning. Thank you. Elan, Michael, thanks very much for moderating and putting us all together here and organizing this. This is my team of scientists about 3 months before we launched service in November '86. You can see, obviously, the director of... So, 33 years ago, Helijet decided to disrupt aviation, and we started a scheduled helicopter service between downtown Vancouver to downtown Victoria. About a 32-minute flight. And, well, the fact is the provincial legislature sits on Vancouver Island, so there's a lot of business and commerce that's going back and forth between the two cities. Seaplanes have been servicing that for many, many years, very, very well. But back in '84, '85, I bumped into a couple of my partners and said, you know, we think the technology is there, the helicopter technology is there, where we can offer a full day of service. We can fly at night, we can fly in inclement weather, more so than a VFR seaplane could. And we said, let's give it a go. So, you know, there's vehicles, car ferries that go back and forth. There's seaplanes, and there's airport-to-airport service between Vancouver Island and Vancouver International Airport that service that commerce. But we felt the helicopter could give an opportunity for door-to-door service, or as close as you could get to door-to-door service. So here we go. First flight, November 27th, 1986, 12 employees, 1 Bell 412. And as we kept telling ourselves here, only fear and ignorance holding us back. So you got to capture the vision. 7 months into it, we're broke. We're bleeding like stuffed pigs. We're overdrafted at the bank. And I think I got kicked out about 5 banks in 7 months who said, I don't need your business. I don't want your account. So, you know, it was a pretty disturbing and sobering board meeting. Board called me in. We're a public company, so I've got some transparency and things to do. And they said, look, Danny, this is not going to work. We got to throw in the towel. And they said, here's your options. You increase the fares by 100% tomorrow on your one-way fares between Vancouver and Victoria, or you lay out 19 people, give up the lease on the Bell 412, shut down your leases at the port authorities on both cities, and go look for a job. So I walked out, and I kind of felt like that iconic shot there of James Dean going down to New York Times Square there with a cigarette in your mouth, and he's looking up and, you know, trench coat on and saying, this is it, you know, we're done. I decided to put the fares up the next day, and we moved on. The reality is not a blink, nada. Nobody flinched. Everybody just stepped up. People started paying, and our load factor started going this way. And over the years, the credibility started building on the program. And I'm not quite sure what happened there, but I think people started looking at it that, you know, with fare increase, this company really wanted to stick around, started pricing their product where they should be, and we started moving into a new generation of clients that started coming in. So, next slide. Today, we do over 300 weekly urban flights between the two cities. We actually service 3 cities now, Nanaimo, which is another midpoint city on Vancouver Island. We moved over 2.5 million people. And we're pretty community-minded. We have an impeccable safety record. We have a very high dispatch reliability. We run at 99% plus all the time. And we're pretty varied now. We're operating most types of aircraft and are looking towards the future of new aircraft, and certainly eVTOL, tilt rotors, and so forth. So winning the hearts and minds of the air traveler is a slow process, and it requires a lot of patience, especially when we're going to operate in an urban environment. You know, you got to remember, like yourselves, your future customers are extremely busy, they're distracted, and they're just bombarded with information. So they don't need another test flight experience. They just really, all we all want is just to have a nice, safe, reliable, affordable, seamless air travel without the stress that we experience today in air travel. So when a newer technology or a disruptor, namely eVTOL, arrives, it's almost like starting over for us from 33 years ago. We expect eVTOL to advance towards commercially viable applications for on-demand or scheduled air services, and a few things have to happen, and these are just a few that have to happen from our side. Patient capital needs to be sourced. I'll let Michael speak on that at NEXA a little later. Employee groups need to be assured that the vision of an eVTOL service is clear. Manufacturers, developers, designers, scientists, suppliers must ring out every risk on their programs or products during these early trial days, okay? And they cannot be influenced by who gets out of the gate first with the first commercial product. It's a tough balance, I realize, but we've got to ring that out. And of course, the service and safety standards between the end users just has to be impeccable. Slide, please. If a company like Helijet is to provide VTOL service to its customers, heliports, vertiports must be designed with ease of access. Through our wholly owned sub-Pacific Heliport Services, we manage 3 big certified heliports. The waterfront of Vancouver houses really quite a unique system. It's a floating helipad right on the waterfront of the city, if anyone's been in Vancouver. It can house up to 5 aircraft with 1 main landing and takeoff. We have jet fuel services there. It's a public use heliport, check-in terminals, cargo services, ample parking, and so forth. Put in by the federal government back in '84, '85. And, you know, it's a model heliport for Canada, and certainly in North America. In Victoria, we also operate a heliport over there. It's a public use facility. Similar services are provided over there. We also operate in Nanaimo now. We have a heliport in the waterfront there. All certified facilities going forward. So when we're going to talk about additions for eVTOL to come in here, we're going to have them in a non-obtrusive proximity that are close to business centers and residential communities, and the ease of access is probably the utmost of importance. For people to change their travel habits, eVTOL passenger service must provide an enhanced and positive experience, not only for the traveler of the future, or vertical lift, but also for the people that live below, the non-travelers. Each carrier, like ourselves, must also work with city fathers and communities to gain the understanding, trust, and respect needed for new eVTOL landing sites, so they can be designed to stick around for the long haul like airports. Operating on short-term tenure and high risk is a very high-risk proposition. It leads to poor planning, and it comes with the belief that the whole concept is temporary. So, and lastly, the owners and the managers need strong determination through a long-lasting commitment, and it can't waver from it because it'll take many, many long hours to get it off the ground. Next slide. So here's just a vision where Helijet sees itself in the future, could see itself in the future. We operate what I call the trunk routes, Vancouver, Victoria, Nanaimo. We have operated cross-border. We're licensed to run scheduled services cross-border, Canada, US. We are looking at Vancouver, Seattle as a nonstop service. And then we're looking at these two centers, Vancouver and Seattle. And this is where the gridlock is. So today for us, it's difficult, if not impossible, to fly the last few miles to our travelers' most important destination, which is their home or their suburbia offices. And that's the challenge. So our customers that we move say, look, we love the service, Danny, but it's a real struggle to get to the heliports or get out of the heliports. And we're trying to satisfy and come up with solutions for that, because these are very important customers of ours, long-standing, a lot of repeat travelers that use our system today that need to get back and forth, but also need to find a window to get back and forth to their homes and their residences. So we think we have this imagination of Helijet, get off a helicopter, jump on an eVTOL, and get out into your suburbia areas. These are all small pockets of populations between 3,000 to 20,000 people, also in the Seattle area as well. All of them take anywhere between an hour to an hour and a half to get from the heliport to their final destination on average. And if we can cut that down, we think eVTOL can give us a 10-minute leg and probably save another hour or so off their day. So when we look at that, we're already saving 4 hours of time between Victoria and Vancouver for most travelers that use our system. And if we can cut down another hour and a half or so with eVTOL, we think we can keep our customers very happy. So I want to speak about where eVTOL can also go beyond urban operations and so forth. And, I think we heard a little bit from Zach there. We can also work and develop eVTOL services in environments where people are really hurting. And I would think that these areas don't need the trust and the acceptance of the technology. They're just open arms right now looking for help, because their lives are in danger. So lives are threatened daily in many parts of the world. Communities are shattered due to war, famine, Mother Nature's wrath. And unfortunately, all these victims, and it's just a horrific thing that we keep watching on television. So I would encourage designers and OEMs, suppliers, scientists, to give a little bit of your time and consider some time and resources into these communities where eVTOL can play a big part. Okay? Please focus some of your incredible brain trust, a lot of your expertise into areas where people really need it. I know I'm going to, a few others are, and we look forward to working with everybody in the room. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you very much, Danny. I have to say I really enjoyed the footage at the beginning of your presentation, because my very first helicopter flight was on a fishing trip in coastal BC. And it was such an amazing experience that I immediately went home and became a helicopter pilot, and that's basically why I'm here today. And so one thing I think that's exciting about eVTOL aircraft is if you make this vertical flight experience available to so many more people, you don't know who's going to discover a passion that they never knew they had. So that's something that's fun and exciting as well. So our next panelist is going to be Rex Alexander. So he is also a pilot. So he's a veteran rotary wing and fixed wing pilot, airframe and power plant technician, aviation entrepreneur, and industry leader, with over 40 years of military, general, and commercial aviation experience. He's the current president of 5 Alpha LLC, which is a global leader in helicopter and vertical lift infrastructure development, design, and regulatory compliance. So welcome, Rex.
Well, thank you, Mike and Elan, for the opportunity to be in front of you today. It's greatly appreciated. Yes, I'm old. That's a good way to put that when you say you're a veteran of something. So Infrastructure was one of those things I got involved in. Everybody always asks you, how did you get in infrastructure? And at one point when I was 20 years in EMS, I got to the point early on, I was really getting tired of architects and engineers making it harder than it should be. I said, infrastructure should not try to kill you if you blink. It should be forgiving. So in that, I started working in that, and it turned into a business over the last 20 years. Next slide. So when we look at who has oversight when it comes to the infrastructure in the aviation world, so everybody pretty much knows that the Federal Aviation Administration does have oversight. Now, the key is how much, especially when we talk about currently heliports, and we're looking at the future for vertiports. Now, the other group that we work with in other countries is ICAO. The FAA is a member of ICAO and does adopt ICAO criteria. Here in the United States, we work with the Department of Transportation in each state. Now, the key there is what type of oversight do they have? Depends on the legislation passed in that state. So here in the United States, there's 50 different ways of doing business from one extreme to the other. So if you're in California or Illinois, there is a very specific criteria that you have to meet. Other states are in the other end of that spectrum. So it's a challenge in learning all those different requirements and regulations. Now, the local municipality also then generates another layer that we deal with. In some areas, they don't have any criteria on the books. So in some cases, we have to go through and write that for them before we move forward. In most cases, you end up with a conditional use permit process, which is pretty straightforward. Now, in other areas, heavily populated urban environments like Los Angeles, there are a tremendous amount of hoops that you have to jump through. The FAA process is the easy part. The municipality part, that's the hard part. Now, the last guy on the list is the fire marshal, or what we refer to as the authority having jurisdiction, or the AHJ. In many areas, he has the most teeth because he has regulation that he has to meet in the code world. So there's the National Fire Protection Association 418, which is heliport standards. Now, there's nothing in there that talks about vertiports yet. I sit on the committee for the 418, and that'll hopefully be something that we see a piece of in 2021 with the next revision. So in that list that you're seeing right there, who has the most teeth? It's the last guy, the farmer. Who has the least power right now over heliports in the United States? Who has the least oversight? It's the guy on the top. The FAA has the absolute least power in the United States when it comes to private use heliports. We'll talk about that in a second. Next. So currently recognized standards for vertiports. Are there any? Next. 0. Next. So when we look at who's writing those, currently the ASTM, if you're not familiar, that is a group that writes standards on a global basis. So ASTM F38 is a committee that's writing those currently. I am actually on that group, and we've been working for about a year now. So ASTM F38, I think our next meeting is in April, to discuss vertiport standards. That's the only group that I know of that's using this and doing this. Now, the good thing is the FAA has embraced ASTM standards. ICAO is looking closely at ASTM. They've actually either have or getting ready to have a big meeting in Canada with ASTM directly to talk. National Fire Protection Association has adopted many ASTM standards over the years. So the key there is we're looking at ASTM as kind of a funnel for standardization across multiple planes. If we can figure that out, at least we'll have some commonality, and that's the key. Next. So we get into current, and this is one of those things, our foundation that we're wanting to build on for this vertiport, this future vision. Where are we today? So when we look at adequate versus certificated, next, we get into Part 135 versus 121. So Part 121, if you're a 121 operator, you're pretty much limited to where you can land and take off from. The facility must be a Part 139 certificated location, and that happens every year. So if you want to be an airport and bring 121 service in and charge for that, you actually have to have an FAA certificate. Now, Part 135, decimal 229 says for Part 135 operators, the facility must be adequate. Now, that's an extremely subjective term, and there's no teeth there whatsoever. So when we look at that, how many heliports are there in the United States? So I went through and pulled all the 5010 data off the FAA's website. 19,629 total landing facilities and takeoff facilities in the U.S. That includes airports, drone or heliports, seaplane bases, balloon ports, the whole 9 yards. 5,869 total heliports in the database. That's the key, in the database. 664 public owned. Now, a lot of those are military when you boil it down and look at it. In reality, there are 60 heliports in the United States that are public use, that are on record. Now, that's 99 to 1. So 1% of all the heliports in the U.S. are public use. So we get into what does the FAA have authority over? What oversight do they have? What can they force somebody to do? They have no authority over private facilities, period. Now, what do they have over public facilities? Well, it's kind of a gray area. A lot of it depends on whether they've accepted AIP funding or Airport Improvement Planning funding. So it went back to 2007. That's about as far as I've gone so far. There's 33 heliports in the United States that have accepted AIP funding. 32 of those are co-located on large airports. So there's really only one heliport in the entire United States since 2007 that I can point to and say the FAA can force somebody to do something. So that's where we get to looking into the future. When we go in and we look at protecting this airspace, and that's going to be a big challenge. The FAA cannot protect private airspace, period. They have things they tell you that you need to do, and it's on you as the owner to do that. So one of the challenges we see going forward is protecting that airspace. So there's also this caveat, I said before, what's in the system, what's in that Airport Master Record 5010. Working with the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team, we looked at 5 specific states and tried to find how accurate that was. We discovered many heliports that aren't in the system. So based on 5 states, we calculated an average of 38 per state, so 1,900 heliports that are not in the system. So when we talk about autonomous operations, if you don't know where these heliports are, and some of them are big heliports, they're not in the 5010 system, how do you know what to avoid? So when we look at where we want to go into the future, we've got to fix what we have currently. Next. What's going to support what? So an airport, in theory, is going to support airplanes, helicopters, and VTOL. Heliports, well, they don't support airplanes per se, but they will support helicopters and VTOL. So what's a vertiport going to support? And we've seen that argument go back and forth. The biggest difference that we see right now, and the FAA is probably not going to have a huge challenge here. It's all going to be based on performance data. Well, that's hard to do because we don't have any aircraft to point to and performance data to point to. So until that happens, we're probably not going to have anything new, at least here in the U.S. from the FAA. So where do we go? The code is where we go to in a lot of cases, because when we look at an all-electric system, and where do we want to put these? A lot of them are going to be on rooftops. Well, rooftops are very, very clearly spoken to in fire code. Now you have to look and say, what's the big difference? So the big difference in our case is it all electric or is it hybrid? Is fuel on board? If fuel's on board, then we have some things we have to do. Not a killer, but when we look at retrofit versus green build, it's easy to design something from scratch that meets all these criteria, but to retrofit something, holy cow, it gets expensive when you start talking going up 40, 50, 60 stories. And you got to move electric up there. You got to move a no standpipe up there. Now you got to bore a hole through every one of those. Is it going to support the weight? Those are those questions we have to look at. So greenfield I see as one of those areas we probably will see more operations than retrofit. Next. So we talk about when we design a heliport, we use what we call the design helicopter. Basically all you're looking at is the dimension. So the main rotor diameter and the overall length are the 2 criteria we use to figure out what the size needs to be. The challenge we see right now is there's over 150 different concepts on the market, so which one do you pick? So ASTM's kind of looking at this and say, okay, how big is this heliport? So there's 3 pieces to a heliport's primary surface. The teal-off, the FADO, and the safety area. And those are all based on rotor diameter and overall length. Well, these don't have rotors. And the overall width in many cases is greater than the overall length. So we've got to figure that out before we start designing stuff. And the one thing that we talk about when I was with our friends over at Uber was, don't under-design this. Don't design it to a specific aircraft, because in 5 years, it may be bigger, and if you don't design it big enough to hold that 5, 10, 15-year evolution, you may wind up becoming obsolete and you're spending 10 times more money. Next slide. This is a video, if you'd hit the play. I got the opportunity to spend some time with our friends in NASA, at NASA Ames in California. They're looking to do testing on the ride quality for the passenger of these VTOLs. So this is me getting the opportunity to test, and you won't hear the wonderful comments that we had back and forth. Don't loop it, don't roll it, don't break it. But this is a 60-foot vertical motion simulator they're looking at for ride quality. And the key here is we're looking at designing infrastructure to actually shoot approaches and departures from. So I'm helping them figure out what that is, because when you look at infrastructure and the impact it has on the ride quality and the performance, it's huge if you don't do it right, because you have to take into the urban environment. When you look at the urban environment, winds and turbulence are everything. And if you don't take that into consideration, you're going to make something worse than it was. So in this case, we look at aircraft performance, power margins, handling characteristics, pilot workload, and do you have enough power to overcome those turbulent events? So those are some of the things I think when we look at reality, it's going to be a very humbling experience for some of the people getting into this environment that don't take that into considerations. And I won't ask questions. I'll wait until we have the panel. But thank you so much for listening.
Great, thank you very much, Rex. So our final panelist is Michael Dyment. He's the managing partner of NEXA Capital Partners, based in Washington, D.C., an investment banking and corporate finance advisory firm. He's undertaken urban air mobility business intelligence and finance programs for eVTOL vehicle and service providers, and directly for NASA. Prior to NEXA, he was senior managing director with PricewaterhouseCoopers, responsible for key aerospace and defense industry clients. So welcome, Michael.
And thanks again to Mike and Elan for organizing this panel. I'll be brief. We want to have enough time for questions. So just by way of background, we are an investment banking firm with a considerable interest and available funding for infrastructure. We have put hundreds of millions of dollars to work over the last 10 years for some key aerospace infrastructure projects. For example, we funded the ADS-B network in the United States, and we funded the Ariane hosted payload on the Iridium satellites that provides ADS-B coverage around the world. We see urban air mobility from the standpoint of investors competing with other investors to look for good future opportunities, but infrastructure takes time to build. So we decided to undertake a market study. Can you go to the next chart, please? And after doing our research and hearing, a lot of the public comments made by luminaries in the field, you've probably heard these quotes yourself from people like Intel and NASA and Uber. We asked ourselves, well, what's real here and what is hype? Next chart. So Morgan Stanley produced a report in December that framed the opportunity as about a $1.5 trillion base case over the next 20 years. So we don't think that's a wrong figure. We just don't think it's firm enough. Next. So the issue for us is that the lack of infrastructure, next, equals, next, limited UAM market. So it's very clear that infrastructure will need to be a lead item in facilitating this market opportunity. We and our syndicate of 8 infrastructure funds represent billions of dollars in investment, and our first question was, well, what city should we start with? Next chart. So what we are looking for and what we think the industry needs is also a solid fact base upon which to make decisions today about investing so that these are wise, fact-based investment decisions that can provide this industry with a greater level of success. Next chart. So the study that we're undertaking looks at actually 78 cities. We started with 70 cities to assess the market opportunity, the economic impact of urban air mobility, and key to that, being able to benchmark these cities to decide where to invest first. Now, it's not just our focus, but I think many of the vehicle developers in this room and a number of you in this room are subscribers to this study, will get a much clearer understanding of the opportunity, working thoughtfully and insightfully with infrastructure funds to make joint decisions moving forward. Next slide. This is some of the analytics that go into our analysis. We have a team of about 20 people assessing the business case. You can get this chart online if you go to nexaadvisors.com, by the way. And the key is the stuff in the center, where we're modeling each of these cities as a type of P3. At the bottom of the center is the UTM business model, which has to be funded by users. And in the middle is those organizations and operators that are going to need to make sufficient money to be able to pay fees and return the investment for the infrastructure investors. Next chart, please. So our fact base begins with, we're using ArcGIS, and we have about 28 layers of information for each city. Again, you can get this information. I think this is all going to be posted on the Vertical Flight Society's website. Next chart. The analytical tools we have can create tunnels in space to assess about 11 different operating models that include things like airport shuttles and emergency services, et cetera, and by city. So it's a very interesting way to start looking at infrastructure and look at business opportunity, city by city. Next chart. Here are some of the organizations that are working with us and co-investing with us. We're very happy to have the Vertical Flight Society and all of its experts assisting. Aviation Week, National Business Aviation Association. You may wonder why NBAA is there, and probably it's because some of the earliest adopters for eVTOL services are going to be coming from the business aviation sector. So, last chart. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. If I could ask all of our panelists to head over to the stage on the other side of the room, and we'll go ahead and open it up for Q&A. So I think we're going to go straight to audience questions just to make the most of our time. Now, if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. I know this is a relatively small room and some of you have large voices, but even so, because we are doing a live stream and a recording, it's important to get your voice on the microphone. So if you do have a question, just wait for the microphone to get to you and then we can go from there. Great. Any audience questions?
Good morning. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if I can't hear myself. I actually have questions for everybody, but I won't do that for the group. So I'm involved in, I'm a Boeing person, so good competition with a couple guys up there. And I actually want to ask you some specific questions on how you guys see the challenge with the FAA. It's not so difficult to get your experimental cert like you've done and we're doing to work on the cab and the PAV and so on. As we look forward to the future with production certificates and conformance and tricky little things like external loads that there are no regulations for, how is the industry going to tackle that? I'm happy to see there's folks looking at infrastructure. It's very important. That's not there either. But aircraft-wise, especially interested from Bell and Airbus, how in the world are we going to team together to get the FAA to move a lot faster is really the question.
Let's take that one first.
I think there's a few ways that we'd approach it. Fully agreed though that there's the regulations, especially with the rewrite of Part 23, is a lot more open right now, so that brings its own challenges. Before it was pretty prescriptive. It also has enabled us to have these conversations now. So I think a lot of it is going to be about working through the FAA on your test cases and exactly how these are all going to come down. Each one of these vehicles, I mean, on the Vertical Flight Society website, you can see there's tons of different designs out there, tons of different ways that people are approaching this problem. And I don't think there's going to be any kind of FAA panacea that's going to solve for all these vehicles at the same time. Right? So I think it's really going to come down to just negotiating and building up custom flight test programs and that kind of thing.
And I'd like to just add that with Part 23 being performance-based and consensus-based, Gamma is doing a lot of work, and ASTM International trying to do a lot of work in developing standards for incorporation into either Part 23 or whatever other performance standards come in the future. So there is a lot of work going on in a regulatory framework to approve aircraft.
Thanks.
Okay, next question.
My first.
Okay, I think, Dan, you can go ahead and go first.
Okay. Are you all familiar with what JARIS has done and working with EASA with specific operational risk assessment for something that's between open and certifiable systems? What they've done is, I think, superior. They're an international society, JARIS is, they cover everything. And basically, they've opened it up so that you put the emphasis on the specific operational risk assessment as opposed to going through full certification. And when we keep talking about autonomous vehicles and we talk about that, they've done that for drones. But in reality, everybody's goal in this system is to get rid of the pilot, right? And I see an equivalent of that in the United States. I've been on ASTM committees and stuff. And what they're so far ahead of what we're doing in the States is pathetic, but yet we have people on that JARIS committee that I don't know if half the people are. Is anybody here aware of the specific operational risk assessment approach? They're coming out with version 2.0, by the way, anytime within the next few months, I think.
Yeah, we're looking at the JARIS approach, and I think it's important to do so, to your point, because of the risk-based model that they're laying out. These new configurations can actually help you do that better because you're stepping outside of the old regulations and thinking about it in a different way. So I like their approach, and we're studying it pretty carefully because you've got a new aircraft to deal with that can adhere to that risk-based approach in a different way than we've done before.
Yeah, another thing is, commercial transport airplanes have been doing consensus-based aerospace recommended practices for, since the 90s, right? And you have 4754A that's being updated to B, and you got 4761. And basically realizing that nobody can afford to do commercial transports with these types of aircraft. But that framework of a functional system management approach, safety management approach, is exactly what everybody else in other industries use. And to me, instead of trying to reinvent new regulations, which is going to take a long time to do, if you go into an objective performance-based thing and you're talking about consensus standards, you ought to review the interplay that takes place in commercial transports that the Boeings and Airbuses do. And basically that philosophy of functional safety management really starts with concept of operations, starts with operational risk assessment. Now realize commercial transport airplanes, they have the whole air traffic management system, they got the airways in the sky, so that's all pretty mature. But for what we're talking about, I don't see people talking about that, but that's the logical way to attack this problem, I think, instead of inventing a whole bunch of new committees and different organizations. It ought to be a consensus, and that's what aerospace recommended practices are about.
Okay.
Another question?
Okay. Thomas Krasinski, Airbus. So, well, I appreciate a lot the exchange and the variety of the different point of view. And Mike, thank you. It's really the role of the Vertical Flight Society to animate such exchanges. So I have a question for Michael, NEXA Capital Partners. So it's very good that the capital partners are interested by the business. So it means that there is a fish in the water, and there is to give this opportunity for the industry to foresee in the future is a very good thing. But my question is how you access, how you cope with the risk. What for you is the biggest risk in all this story? Is it technology? Is it safety? Is it environment acceptance? Is it, well, a risk is always linked to the business, and how you assess it?
Well, one thing is certain, we will be assessing it. But you're right. I mean, there are operational risks, market risks, technical and financial risks. The risk landscape is full. But the industry will get there, we think. We're on the spectrum of optimism, we're leaning more toward the positive. We think that certification issues are going to get tackled. There's momentum in the industry. There's at least several $1 billion being invested these days in technologies that are going to be very helpful in this respect: batteries, motors, airframes, things of that nature. I think the operators we've heard from a couple of operators just on this panel. They're anxious to move on. So from our standpoint, we're doing our study because we want to be as informed as we can be about which cities provide a potential for a positive market opportunity. Our infrastructure investment has to be paid for over time with user fees and things of that nature. So I think we're all going to get there, and I'd love to talk to you offline about this further if you'd like.
There's a question in the back.
Thank you for an excellent panel and discussion. Rex's reference to a design reference helicopter sparked this question, so I'll invite Rex to answer first. But if anybody else wants to chime in, I'd be delighted to hear what you think. A design reference aircraft is required not only for the design of the heliport, but also for the design of the instrument procedure. And since all-weather operations are going to be pretty important to urban mobility, I would think, I'm wondering if you have thoughts on how we're going to design the procedure, since that reference glide slope is so important. And as you know, for a long time, helicopters were restricted to or heliports were restricted to protecting airspace on a 3-degree glide slope, and helicopters were restricted to operating on a 3-degree glide slope because the design reference aircraft was a DC-3. And I'm wondering if we're going to see the same sort of spirit of cooperation, both domestically and internationally, as we start to put in vertiports, and what sort of protected airspace are we going to require around them, given the capabilities of these aircraft?
Good question. Now, on the infrastructure side, I could say that one of the caveats that's in the current advisory circular for Heliport Design Guide, they actually talk about if you don't know what the rotor diameter is, they actually have a formula based on the ratios of all the helicopters in the back. And if you have a ratio for figuring out what the TLOF is versus the FATO, they say if you don't know the overall, or if you don't know the rotor diameter, you take whatever the overall length is, multiply it by 0.8. If you know what the rotor diameter is but don't know what the overall length is, you multiply it by 1.2. So if we use that caveat and say that, well, we don't have a rotor diameter, we have an overall length or an overall width. And what we say is, which one's the largest? That then is the controlling dimension. Use that then to factor whatever the TLOF would be. And then I think we have something that the FAA would probably buy off on. The challenge right now in having sat down, Mike and I in Washington, D.C. with the airports division had this conversation about a month ago. They were like, we're not putting anything in print until we have data, period. So I asked the question, I said, so what's your guidelines today if somebody wants to build something that will meet a vertiport type aircraft in the future. Build it like you would a heliport. My opinion is, well, yeah, that's probably going to be very similar. I don't see a lot of differences. Just make sure you overbuild it and have a fudge factor in there. As far as the instrument procedures, I'm not going to answer that question.
Great. Another question in the back there.
Brendan McCormick from Helijet International. I'd just like to recognize my president and what an excellent job he did. A question to pick up on the last one was design aircraft, and I'll just throw this question at the panel in general. To understand the design aircraft, is the vision, just to be clear, more toward an unmanned vehicle? And when it comes to performance, is the paradigm that we're working off of jet engines today that are susceptible to all these different failures due to all the moving parts that we talked about in the presentation? If you're designing infrastructure around manned vehicles that require human interaction and the size of the pad so that the pilots can keep a reference to that pad, but in fact the vehicles that are going to be using the infrastructure are possibly unmanned and subject to different failures and performance requirements, are we going down the right path?
So I think I'm following you. I would, I'm going to take one out of Rex's book there, and say let's do the largest common denominator. We believe that initially there are pilots involved with this due to either customer acceptance or regulatory work that still has to be done, that we don't want to stop the system prematurely. So I think going to the larger common denominator is smart. Is that kind of what you're asking about? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, things like procedures would be built around human interaction. If it's a robot doing this, you don't necessarily, the device would have to follow a path, but not necessarily a procedure.
Well, okay. So and there's another piece there too. Then I would say we have to include not just the pilot in the human interaction piece, but the people. There's a lot of visions about this seamless interface between a tube and a machine, and maybe that's how the vertiport ends up. But I can't imagine a case where there's not going to be people on the vertiport at some point when a vehicle's trying to operate, and we could say maybe that's not the norm or not the desired, but we know that's a case that you're going to have to consider, because you don't want a negative interaction between those folks and the vehicle for sure. And there may be a case where everybody's got to get out of the system and on the vertiport. So again, if that's the right term for it, is largest common denominator, I'd say we should head that way.
Yeah, I'd also add that I think Gamma, they have their simplified vehicle operations group, that they've done a pretty good job at breaking down the pilot functions into 12 different functions. We borrowed them, I'll say, thanks to Gamma. We put them on our website. And we kind of did describe a bit how we see that autonomy being integrated into the airspace, and that includes landing on helipads and that kind of thing. I think one thing that's important to know is I don't see in the near term, and maybe even medium to long term, having humans completely out of the loop. I think there are always going to be humans in the loop. Just as a very simple example, I don't think any of us here would trust your Google Assistant or Siri to talk to ATC reliably with very, very, very high degrees, like several nines reliability, right? That's not there yet, and that's, I think, quite a long ways away, especially when we talk about now flying in different regions with different accents, and it's all maybe English perhaps, but still it's English with different accents, so it gets complicated. Right? Even us as English speakers, if it's a very thick accent when you're flying somewhere else, it's even hard for us to interpret that as even for we're native speakers. So I think there's always going to be humans in the loop, and now the real question is, out of all these different functions that pilots are responsible for today, which ones are the ones that are easily automatable? I think that's what the ones we're going to tackle first, right? So things like navigation, waypoint following, that's obviously automatable today. Every commercial jet pretty much does that. things that, again, get more complicated are terminal procedures and communications with ATC and that kind of thing. So that's probably where you're going to have that human loop again. So.
Very good. Yeah, no, thank you for that.
I think one of the other things that'll be an interesting discussion when we get into this really deep with ICAO is when you look at what ICAO adopts, what the FAA has adopted here in the United States, we look at the design aircraft. We also look at the redundancy necessary to meet any criteria. So in ICAO world, you may have a huge difference in single engine versus twin engine and the ability to fly away on OEI, and it's different than what we adopt here in the US. So when you look at the infrastructure, how it's built, how it's designed, I see a very tenuous discussion on what the capability is in emergency situations, what are the redundancies. So we see what we are allowed to do in, say, downtown London. You can't fly a single engine helicopter in certain areas, period. Now with this new VTOL redundancy system, I see that that's something that'll have to be discussed. That will have a huge impact for us as what the infrastructure then has to look like.
Very good. Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, George Castillo from the FAA. My focus is mostly in the aircraft certification arena. There was a question earlier about what's the FAA doing regarding the standards for certifying these aircraft. There's a lot of activity that's going on. We're actively working with applicants and potential applicants. So those standards are being developed as we speak. There's also mention of the JARA's CONOPS approach. The same people that are supporting those activities are supporting this industry. So we are cognizant of other approaches. They may not work, but we're not reinventing things that we've already done and we know they work. But there's some challenges that we'll have to overcome, but I can assure you that those are being addressed as we speak. There's a long-term future to develop consensus standards and general standards for all these aircraft. We'll get there eventually, but there's a lot of variations right now, and we want to make sure that we're responsive to the immediate needs while we work to the longer-term vision of having a standard that's public so everybody knows what that standard is. So just wanted to make a comment regarding those two items.
Great, thank you.
I think there's real-world experiences that validate what George just said. I mean, the 609 certification basis, we could have had all the same questions there, and the FAA and Bell and now Leonardo have worked together to come up with the basis. And is that the same one we should use for these? No, there's new parts that can help us do that more streamlined. But just from the OEM side, I'd like to validate that point. It's easy for us to all say, point the other way, and it's their fault, but it's not. It works, and addressing what's necessary today is really important because some people are trying to move out, and the ideal standards aren't there yet, and it comes back to working the problem together. So.
Great. And
I think maybe on that note. I wanted to say that's really the key, right? So everybody needs to work together and realizes what the challenges are and come together in these different committees and these different activities and with clear eyes look at what the challenges are and how best to address them.
Great.
Say wrap up.
Wrap up? Okay. And I think we're going to end there just to give everyone time to get to the next event. But thank you all so much for joining us. Again, it's really excellent to see so many people here. And thanks to all of our panelists for great presentations and some really good discussion. Thank you.
So this event was live streamed, so you can get it on eVTOL.news, the links, as well as the presentation. So again, thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, that was good.
Yes, so it was live streamed, like the regular.
How are you? Thank you. Yeah, we're trying.
So I think the UAM office. I think it's also large. But practically, that's going to be very, very high level. Maybe 10 people. Write it down for you.
Very good. Well, I'd like to learn more, Jeremy.
So if you go to
Please do.
and
well, I'd
let
love
me
to
check real fast.
get involved, and I'd like to share with you what we're doing separately from Helijet.
Thank you very much for coming.
We're starting a separate division in the company that will only focus on humanitarian efforts. My brother lives in Africa.
And then I think
some water testing, not a lot. 2 or 3 of us are part of a company that will try to work with other groups